Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great, good. The Samozrodnaya Vintovka Tokareva Obrazets 1940 Goda, and I apologize to Russians everywhere for that utter butchering of their language, or SVT-40 as the rest of us know it, was of course a Soviet battle rifle that saw fairly extensive use during World War II. The rifle was intended to replace the venerable Mosin Nagant M9130, something that didn't happen, largely thanks to wartime difficulties in manufacturing a relatively expensive and complicated rifle at massive scale. It has been, of course, compared to the M1 Garand because every semi-automatic battle rifle from that era usually is, and although it arguably wasn't as successful as Garand's brainchild, it did actually win fans among both Soviet and German soldiers. Where it definitely did not succeed, however, was replacing the M9130 sniper rifle variants. Today we're going to take a look at the SVT-40, the sniper rifle, and why it never took. Now, it shouldn't surprise you that neither the SVT-40 sniper nor the rifle in general was born from a god's forehead. The Soviet desire for a battle rifle to replace the M9130 dated back years, all the way back to the 1920s. By the dawn of the 1930s, there were two designs under consideration. One by Sergei Semenov, who of course would gain fame later for his PTRS-41 and SKS-45, and the other by Fyodor Tokarev, he of TT-33 renown. Now, Semenov's Select Fire AVS-36 won the competition and was publicly introduced in 1938 during that year's May Day parade, and it would go on to see action in Finland the following year. Unfortunately, there were problems: weak firing pins, bad magazines, among others, which forced the Soviets to return back to the drawing board. In July 1940, they adopted Tokarev's SVT-40, which of course was basically a modified version of his earlier and failed SVT-38 design. Now, they had their semi-automatic battle rifle, but in true Soviet fashion, rather than make it a universal rifle, it was essentially a squad leader's rifle, with the grunts continuing to carry the M9130. There were some entire infantry units that were issued the SVT-40, but those tended to be guards units. Now, along with wanting to eventually replace the M9130 with a new battle rifle, they also wanted to replace the M9130's sniper variant. Now, that process had actually begun some years earlier when the Soviets had tested a version of Tokarev's rifle with the PE-PEM scope that was in current use with the M9130. Those experiments showed that the scope was too long and caused issues with ejection. Now, as someone with some small experience of scoping a rifle with the same sort of action as the SVT, I will guarantee you that the issue was ejected cases oftentimes were deflected back in the chamber after striking the scope. Floated was the idea of an offset scope, but that was rejected because it wasn't felt to be conducive to shooting. Well, rather than give up on the idea, the Soviets decided to design an all-new scope and were using an SVT-38 as a test bed because the SVT-40 hadn't been accepted yet. In January 1940, they tested a new 2.5 power scope and several mounts, one of them designed by Fedorov no less, but the results didn't pan out. In May of that year, they ran more tests, this time with an SVT-40, Fedorov's mount, and a new 3.5 power scope design. The system passed muster, and the optic became what we know today as the PU scope. Now, some changes did need to be made to the rifle to accommodate the scope and its mount. The first was the addition of rails on either side of the receiver that the scope mount would slide into. Secondly, a notch was added at the back of the receiver that a cross pin engaged with to secure the mount. So they had the rifle, they had a mount, and a new scope. They were off to the races, right? Of course not. It wasn't all the way until March 1941 that they actually started to produce the new sniper rifle at Tula plant number 314. Now, I should say that the rifles were only produced in 1941 and 1942 and only at Tula plant number 314. Now, normally I'd be telling you that any sniper rifle that has a date outside of 41 and 42 or is missing the proper proof mark is an obvious fake. But here's where it can get a little tricky. The sniper rifles manufactured at the Tula plant will have that plant star mark and the C inspection stamp for 1941 rifles, though the 1942 models seem largely missing that inspection stamp. The problem for collectors is that a sniper rifle could also be assembled in the field, and often were, with any SVT-40 that had factory rails for the mount. Those rails were cut into most rifles in both 1941 and 1942. Add in a made-in-the-field notch in the receiver, throw on a mount and a scope, and you're in business. I'm not going to get into the deal of faking SVT-40 sniper rifles. It's a little bit outside of what we're here for today, but I thought you might be interested to at least hear some of this. At any rate, returning to our story, approximately 50,000 sniper rifles were manufactured, and if that seems a low number to you, well, you're right. The Soviets reportedly produced over 330,000 Mosin Nagant M9130 sniper rifles between 1941 and 1943. So why so few SVT-40 sniper rifles? Why, we even have a picture here of no less than Lyudmila Pavlichenko theatrically holding her SVT-40 sniper rifle and looking for Fritz. Well, the rifle's performance is the reason why M9130 sniper rifles survived in Soviet use until the 1960s. Unfortunately, the SVT-40 sniper variant had some serious issues. The first of which is the cold bore shot. It probably won't surprise you to know that a sniper's first shot is often the most important one. It might be the only one they get, so it has to land. Ivan or Olga sights their scope based on a few shots, thought was all good. Then they take their first shot at a German and miss because that first cold bore shot didn't go where they expected it to. Subsequent shots would land at the point of aim, but at that point, it might be too late. The rifles also reportedly saw vertical shot stringing, something that I've personally found is often due to a scope shifting back and forth, causing shots to impact in a vertical line. Now, I haven't been able to find whether it was the mount or the scope that was explicitly blamed for this, so it's all conjecture what the actual fault was. There were also reports that the rifles were often not seated particularly well in the stock, which forced a field expedient repair that saw shims inserted near the receiver. A receiver shifting around in its stock is another knock against accuracy. And with all these problems, the Soviets decided in 1942 that the SVT-40 wasn't fit to be a sniper rifle. Whatever else you want your sniper rifle to be, accuracy is the base requirement. Unfortunately, the SVT-40 wasn't sufficiently accurate thanks to stock, fitment, and barrel issues. At the end of the war, most SVT-40 sniper rifles were refurbished and turned into regular battle rifles. It's fairly rare now to find a factory original and all numbers matching SVT-40 sniper rifle, and most on the market are former sniper rifles that have recovered mounts and PU scopes reinstalled. I'm going to be honest with you. I did plenty of research, and the one question that I could not answer, I think, is a fairly obvious one. How did they not catch this during trials? Now, granted, they were using presumably hand-selected rifles, the best of the best, along with custom-made test mounts. What works in a limited workshop run is often difficult to translate into mass production. But that doesn't answer how these made it out as they did. Rifles were zeroed with the PU scope as they rolled off the assembly line, so this should have been seen before it was issued. Wartime expediency also doesn't provide an adequate answer. Workers and plant managers who turned out substandard arms would find themselves testing out those very arms out at the front. So quality control isn't an easy answer either. Perhaps one day I will find the answer and report back. So there you have it. Nothing exotic or extreme. The SVT-40 was merely a flawed design from the perspective of a precision rifle. The Soviets didn't have the time or resources to further refine the SVT-40 sniper concept or the rifle itself in general, because they frankly needed every single rifle they could lay their hands on. That's why M9130 production continued on. As I mentioned earlier, the SVT-40 was a complicated and expensive design to produce for a country that was on its back heel fighting a desperate defensive war. The simple matter was that the M9130 could be produced more quickly, and in the case of the sniper role, was already a proven platform. If the SVT-40 as sniper does have a legacy, it's at least that its PU scope made its way to the Mosin Nagant. At any rate, I hope you found today's video to at least be vaguely entertaining and mildly informative. As always, I hope you have a fantastic day. Take care, and bye-bye.